Hi, and thank you for joining me in today's podcast, the Oikos Family Podcast. I'm Sonja Wood, and we are going to be talking about Chapter 5 from Weed with an Ill Name, our little Oikos Classic. And this chapter is us getting to know more about little Fanny, who is George's younger sister. And she has a bit of a problem with temper. And it really lets her down because she's just got the sweetest nature and softest heart. But then she's got this problem with a flaring up temper, which she is very sorry about because she had a little friend come and stay with her and she lost her temper, which meant her little friend wanted to go home and not come back and visit again. And Fanny's aunt had to teach her a thing or two. But, I don't need to explain the whole story because it's going to follow now in this next chapter. And I just hope you will be able to glean something from it that will be helpful to you or to somebody who you think it might be supportive for. Okay, so let me leave you with this chapter 5 from Weed with an Ill Name, and say thank you for stopping by and thank you for joining me on today's podcast. And I'm looking forward to sharing Chapter 6 with you in the next podcast. Bye for now.
Chapter 5. More character is revealed. George Franklin's selfish attitudes showed almost every day in one way or another. For instance, he expected his sister to do exactly as he told her. If he decided to take a walk, he might demand that Fanny go with him. He didn't care if she was busy doing something else or if she didn't want to go. George's unkind attitude would have caused many fights if Fanny had been as selfish and stubborn as her brother. However, she usually gave in to his demands. She would still have had a great deal of trust and respect for him, if it wasn't for another one of his bad character traits. This one was the cause of many troubles. We shall soon find out what it was. George also showed his terrible attitude in the arrogant way he acted with Mr. Paris, his tutor. We saw the disrespectful way George wrote about this gentleman before he met his teacher. Unfortunately, this disrespect grew when George found out that his teacher, who had an excellent character and many good abilities, was also very poor. The foolish boy thought that being poor was a very good reason to despise anyone. George didn't bother to hide his unkind, critical remarks about Mr. Paris when he discovered that he wore an old coat and patched shoes. George also despised that Mr. Paris always walked the whole way to the Elms instead of driving. George's uncle sharply reproved him for acting this way towards his teacher. Mr. Gray pointed out how selfish as well as sinful it was to be proud of one's wealth and lifestyle. He insisted that his nephew act properly from now on. To George's credit, he was not rude to Mr. Paris again. George didn't use a rude tone of authority again towards Sam after they settled things. George was careful, however, to show in many other ways how much better he thought he was than the poor servant. This is the way George treated Mr. Paris and all the people who worked for his uncle. We have talked about George Franklin enough for now, though. Of course, this only made matters worse. After he had succeeded in making her a little bit angry, he would say, "See, didn't I tell you? Look at how red she is turning. Why, Fan, your cheeks and ears are red as fire." Unfortunately, whenever he made this mean remark about her cheeks, and especially her ears, she would always get angry and lose her temper. In these rages, Fanny hardly knew what she was saying or doing. After Fanny's rage was over, she was terribly sorry that she had lost her temper. She was especially sorry if she had hurt anyone she loved. It's true that the little girl did try to control her quick temper. When she was in a better mood, she seriously promised many times never to lose her temper again if she could help it. For some reason, when she was tempted to get angry again, she forgot all her good promises. With her own willpower, she had built walls to hold in her feelings. These would come crashing down, and anger would rush into her soul like a flood of water. Sweet little Fanny was always sinning, repenting, and sinning again. She couldn't seem to stop. Mrs. Gray lovingly tried to help her niece solve her distressing problem. Eventually, Fanny learned to behave properly when she was with her aunt. However, Mrs. Gray knew that she wouldn't always be there to control Fanny's outbursts. It was really up to Fanny to change herself. Sadly enough, Mrs. Gray had been right when she had told her husband that they would have a problem not only on their hands, but on their hearts as well, when they cared for her sister's children. One day Fanny said, "Aunt Rachel, would you mind? Can I ask you to do a really big favor for me?" "Yes, you may, Fanny. I don't think there's anything you could ask me to do that I wouldn't gladly do for you. So what is it?" "Thank you very much, Aunt Rachel. Well, it's about Susan Watson. I want her to stay overnight a few days and play with me. Is it all right? Could you ask her if she'd like to come, please? I'd really like to have her come to visit." Now we should explain that one day Mrs. Gray and her niece had gone to Westshire. They spent most of the morning there, shopping and doing errands for Mr. Gray. In the afternoon they visited one of Mrs. Gray's friends, who was taking care of a little orphan girl. The little girl was about Fanny's age. They played together for several hours while the ladies visited. When it came time for Mrs. Gray and Fanny to leave for home, Fanny could hardly bear to leave her new friend. Fanny liked her a lot. That is why she had built up the courage to ask her aunt if Susan could stay with them for a few days. Mrs. Gray thought about it for a little while before she answered. Susan Watson was a happy, talkative little girl. Mrs. Gray knew that she was obedient and had very good manners. She also knew that Susan had been carefully raised and taught as well. She would probably be a good influence, as well as a good friend to her niece. Mrs. Gray also thought that it would be a special treat for Fanny, since she didn't have any other friends at the farm, except her brother George. She knew that Susan Watson would love to visit them. It might also be very good for her, since she was an orphan. Who isn't interested in orphans? Who isn't glad to show them respect and love? No one, surely, who has a heart to sympathize with human sorrows. These thoughts went quickly through Mrs. Gray's mind before she answered Fanny's question. Suddenly, another thought came to her, which made her hesitate a little bit longer. Maybe her face showed what she was thinking, because Fanny's eyes filled with tears. She whispered to her aunt, "You don't want to invite Susan, do you? I'm afraid I know why." "Why, Fanny?" "You think... Please, Aunt Rachel, were you thinking about my temper?" The poor girl could hardly find the courage to say this. Then she put her little hand on her aunt's arm. Fanny looked up into her face so meekly and beggingly that Mrs. Gray would have had to have a cold heart not to be touched by Fanny's sadness. "What do you think, my love?" she asked, gently pulling Fanny closer to her and giving her a kiss. "If I am willing to trust you, can you trust yourself to do what's right?" "Oh, Aunt Rachel, I'm sure I could. I'm almost positive I could." And after saying this, Fanny stopped. "You're almost sure of what, my dear?" "That you can trust me. I never could be that naughty to fight with such a darling as Susan. She's a poor orphan without any father or mother." Fanny cried a great deal when she said this, for it touched a very tender place in her heart. It reminded her of her own parents, and her father's sickness, and her mother's grief. Right then she almost thought that she was being selfish for wanting a good thing that her parents couldn't share, especially when they might be feeling very worried and sad at that very moment. After a little while, Fanny calmed down. She was sure that she couldn't possibly lose her temper with such a sweet and lovely person. She made many serious promises to be careful to control her emotions the whole time Susan was there. Mrs. Gray finally agreed to invite Susan to stay for a while at the Elms. It might be good for Fanny, she thought again. It might be a good example for her to see how a calm child acts. It would be very pleasant for the girls to share lesson times with a friend. It may also help the poor orphan to be friends with her, because Fanny will probably be well known and wealthy when she is older. Mrs. Gray said, "I will trust you to keep your word, my dear Fanny. If I can persuade my friend to part with Susan for a couple of weeks, then she will be your guest. If she wants to, she can even come home with us today." It did not take much persuading. Susan was delighted with the idea of spending a long, nice vacation at Mrs. Gray's comfortable farmhouse. The days went by very happily at the Elms. 1 week and then 2 weeks went by, and still the young friends didn't have an argument. They didn't even disagree with each other quietly in their own thoughts. They sat together and did their schoolwork in the morning. In the afternoon they did their sewing or embroidery. They took walks and played together. There was not even the slightest sign of any dislike towards each other. All this time, Fanny was unusually agreeable with everyone around her. She carefully guarded her temper. Once or twice George had teased her and tried to make her upset. Fanny patiently ignored him. She did begin to say something angry back at him, and then stopped herself in the middle of it. Mrs. Gray had seen all this and was very happy about it. She congratulated herself because her experiment was working. One unhappy afternoon, Mrs. Gray left the two girls alone together for an hour to play. Suddenly, she heard a loud cry come from the room where they were playing. When she quickly went to see what had caused it, she saw little Susan crying. She was covering her stinging red cheek with her hand. Fanny was pale with anger, standing a little farther away. Her aunt noticed that she already looked very guilty and ashamed of herself. For a second or two, Mrs. Gray was so surprised and disappointed that she could not talk. Before she had time to ask a single question, Susan ran to her for protection. Trying not to cry very hard, Susan said in a quiet, shaky little voice, "Please, ma'am, will you take me back to Westshire today?" "Yes, my dear child. You can go back home if that is what you want to do," the farmer's wife said kindly. "First, I would like to know why you want to go home so quickly. What happened to your cheek? The cheek you are trying to hide from me, to make it look so streaked and red." "Please, ma'am, I don't really want to tell. Please don't ask me to tell you," Susan said, looking confused. She tried to escape from the lady, who had put her arm around her so she wouldn't be afraid of Fanny. By this time, Fanny's short little tantrum was over. Her heart was full of sadness and guilt. Taking big gulps of air, Fanny rushed forward and threw her arms around her hurt little friend. Fanny touched Susan's sore cheek. "Oh, Aunt Rachel, I have been very, very naughty again," she wept. "It was all my fault. How could I ever do that, darling? Susan, dear, please forgive me. I didn't mean to do that. Oh, Aunt Rachel, I have been so wicked, so sinful. Oh dear, what shall I do?" Poor Fanny cried all this and more from her heart as she hugged Susan. She even knelt beside her to beg her forgiveness. We do not need to say any more about this incident. We don't need to tell the reason the fight began and the quick, angry actions that followed. It is good enough to say that Susan did not hesitate to forgive Fanny. Still, Susan asked again, "If it's all right, Mrs. Gray, I would rather go home to Westshire as soon as possible." That day, Fanny lost her young friend. She cried quietly as she sat alone at her lessons. All her recent comfort and happiness was gone. She humbly accepted her loss. She knew that her kind aunt had good reason to be upset with her. Even though we have not told everything that happened when Fanny got angry at her guest, Mrs. Gray found out. She knew how innocently and unintentionally the argument began. Even Mr. Gray was very stern and quiet. This was surprising because he had grown very fond of his niece and usually wasn't strict with her. Her brother, who was usually so thoughtless to her, seemed sorry about Fanny's disgrace and what had happened. Now that Fanny knew that she had been wrong, there was something that was even harder for her to take. The spirit of a man will sustain his infirmity, but a wounded spirit who can bear? Proverbs 18:14. Fanny's spirit was wounded. In her heart she knew she was guilty. She knew she had sinned by not treating the people she loved the way she should have. She also knew that she was very guilty in the sight of God, her heavenly Father. Quite a few days went by before the humble girl got enough courage to look at her aunt's troubled face. Many more days went by before she could think about her terrible behavior without starting to cry. She promised herself that she was never going to lose her temper again. Being sorry and having good intentions could not undo what she had done. After quite a while, Fanny decided she would write a letter to Susan, begging her for forgiveness. She wrote Susan a sad little letter which could hardly be read without crying. When Susan Watson read it, it touched her heart. She wrote back such a sweet, loving answer that Fanny was even more sorry that she had ruined their new friendship. Fanny wanted so much to ask her aunt, and she would have been so humble, to invite Susan to the Elms again. Fanny didn't dare ask.